Welcome to my webinar on person-centred risk. My name is Michelle Livesley and I work for Helen Sanderson Associates. I'm going to start today by sharing a great question that I had recently from someone on our Helen Sanderson Associates community group site. And the question was, how do we support people to have more wow moments in their life, and what would it take for services not to respond with eek? I thought this was a brilliant question. It was both challenging and thought-provoking. So I thought that I'd kind of base my webinar today around thinking about this. I think in answer to this, what we need to do is think about what is it that's actually getting in the way of supporting people who use services to have the life that they want. I love this quote, only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how far they can go. And often our services talk about helping people achieve the potential, find the meaning in life, but then fall short of enabling them to pursue that. So let's think about risk from two perspectives. There are two main categories. One is keeping the person alive, and the other is supporting the person to have a life. So keeping the person alive means thinking about risk management in relation to some of those real practical things that we have to think about. Medication administration, using equipment such as hoists, bed rails, thinking about preventing scaldings and burns, thinking about fire hazards, etc. All of those things really important around keeping the person alive. And a person-centred approach to risk ensures that these risks are controlled absolutely, and that the organisation must have systems in place to ensure that the person is protected from these kind of risks. The next category is supporting a person to have a life. And although the person might need help with the other kinds of supports with medication and hoists, etc., we need to focus on managing the risk involved, ensuring that they have a life that makes sense to them and reflects their hopes, dreams and aspirations. I remember a story that my colleague Jo told me once about somebody that she was doing support planning with, and the person had physical disabilities, and he said until he'd really started to develop his own support plan, he'd been so healthy and safe that he might as well have been dead. Most people who work in services would tell you, hand on heart, that they want people that they support to have a good and fulfilling life. However, supporting them to do that and managing the risk can feel tricky when you are a support worker, a manager, a senior manager. And I think there are several reasons why people aren't necessarily supported well when it comes to managing risks. A good starting point is for us to explore is thinking about attitudes to risk. For all of us, risk is a regular part of everyday life, and we make decisions about risk every single day, sometimes without even thinking about it. This can be really different when it comes to supporting people who use services to take risks. And what we know is many people are prevented or discouraged from making changes to their lives and taking opportunities because of perceived risks. Now, that might be because of our own individual attitudes to risk. And what's risky to me might be completely different to what's risky to you. And I might support somebody in a way that puts my values into their risk situation. For example, I'm really scared of heights. And my cautiousness and fear of heights might have a values impact on somebody who maybe decides they want to do a skydive or climb a mountain. So I have to be aware of that, and I have to manage my own individual attitudes to risk. Our organisations might have an impact on how we manage risk. So being clear about what the risk management policy says And also the culture of the organisation is really important when we're thinking about risk. Sometimes we have wonderfully supportive and enabling policies that just don't match the behaviour on the ground, and we need to pay attention to that and address it when it comes up. Another thing to pay attention to is our interpretation of what the law says about risk and what legislation guides us to do or not to do. And often we can believe there might be myths that have come up about what we can and what we can't do that aren't necessarily always supported by legislation. When it comes to legislation, all the guidance is very supportive of person-centred approaches to risk management. For example, health and safety executives say that risk management is about taking practical steps to protect people from real harm and suffering. It's not about bureaucratic back covering. And I have a phrase for this, and it's called the CYA approach, the cover your arse. And although we all want to protect people, protect colleagues, protect the organisation, that shouldn't be done at the expense of stopping people doing what makes sense to them. The Health and Safety Executive sets out some principles of sensible approach to risk management, and that's about ensuring that people are properly protected, enabling innovation and learning and not stifling them, ensuring that those who create risks manage them responsibly and understand that failure to manage significant risks responsibly is likely to lead to robust action. It's also about enabling individuals to understand that as well as the right to protection, they also have to exercise responsibility. What they say it's not about is reducing protection of people from risks that cause real harm, scaring people by exaggerating or publicising trivial risks, stopping important recreational and learning activities for individuals where the risks are managed, creating a totally risk-free society, and generating useless paperwork mountains. The CARE Act says that the principal elements of well-being include control by the individual over day-to-day life, which has to include risks, and that includes care and support provided and the way it is provided, and protection from abuse and neglect. So although the key purpose of risk management is to keep people healthy and safe, it also supports people's rights to have the lifestyle that they choose, including the right to make bad decisions by minimising the risks. I love this quote from Lord Justice Mumby, which says, what good is it making someone safer if it merely makes them miserable? So the first step in thinking about risk in a person-centred way is to reflect on what we're trying to achieve together and to think about the purpose. So how can we use a process to enable people to have choice and control in their life as citizens in their community? We need to think about the people involved, and certainly when I started my career, when I first became a manager, I was expected to create risk assessments, and I think it was pretty typical that what I did was I would go away into the staff room and write up the risk assessments. But what we need to do is to share responsibility and get the right people around the table to think proactively about the risks so that we've got the right amount of input and contribution from those who know and care about the person. We also think about the process for thinking about the person and what needs to change in their life, how we record it and how we put actions into practice. And we have to think about how we can review progress. Now, the process can be difficult if the people who support the person and part of their life don't have a shared understanding of the purpose of their work or involvement with the individual. So we must start by finding out what the person wants as well as what they need. What are the things that are important to them in their life? Positive risk-taking starts with understanding what the person wants to try, to choose or control. And this information can often be found in a one-page profile, a recent person-centred review, or a care and support plan. We also need to think about how we can best organise our work together to give that person the best chance to be fully involved. And the process is about supporting the person to live the life they want to, so every effort must be made to ensure that they're as involved in the process as they're able and as they want to be. We have to find out what the person wants to achieve and what their hopes, dreams and aspirations are. And then people in their life, both paid and unpaid, can work with the person in ways that work for them to work out how to support them to achieve what they want and to reduce any inherent risks. This means meeting and talking in a way that the person understands, and if the person doesn't communicate typically, we might use a whole range of communication methods to do that, and think about a time and a place which better suits the person. Everybody involved in managing the risk should recognise that their efforts must be directed at engaging and encouraging the person to have choice and control over their life. We can often find common ground by keeping the person involved and ensuring that their wishes are central to all discussions, because what we're doing is trying to enable the person to have choice and control in their life as a citizen in the community through a person-centred approach. We're really thinking about how we can support that person to have choices and that their well-being is maximised as much as possible. It is normal when considering risk that there will be some disagreement. Families can be protective of their loved ones, as I am of mine, and while some professionals might be used to seeing an individual in different ways, for example, a social worker's view of an individual could be different to the psychiatrist's view, we need to pay attention to everybody's perspective. When people have different agendas, it can cause conflict. So we need to think about how people can be heard and how we can manage that agenda, diffuse disagreements and keep the person central. So focusing on what the person wants from the situation and agreeing what people think is in the person's best interest in terms of safety, making community connections and having choice and control will enable everybody to identify what the issues of conflict are. Crucially, keeping the person at the centre is what we're trying to do. So key purpose of risk management is to keep people healthy and safe, but it can also be used to challenge inequality, supporting people to make friends and to become valued members of society. In addition, effective risk management safeguards the organisation, and it's important that everybody involved has a shared understanding of what they're trying to achieve through person-centred approach and how this process can enable the person to maximise their choice and control. It's also important to identify the ways in which the organisational vision of how risk management is used to support people to exercise choice and control may differ from how it works in practice. Here's the process that we use when we're exploring risk from a person-centred perspective. So the first thing we're thinking about is who is the person? And we're thinking about what do people like, admire or appreciate about the person so that we understand what that person brings to the table, what they're good at and what their capacity is. Often we think about deficits when we think about risk. So what is it that the person isn't able to do or what shouldn't they be doing? But what we want to start with is thinking about their assets. We also want to know what's important to them and what they want out of life and what good support looks like. There are different tools that you can use for this, a one-page profile, a person-centred plan, and relationship circles can also help with that. We also want to think about where are we now, so what's current reality, what's the issue, what does the person want to do or achieve, and what's working and not working currently from different perspectives. We would always start with the person's perspective about what's working and not working, And again, if that person doesn't communicate typically, we would be best guessing with integrity based on our knowledge and understanding of the person. We also need to think about the risks involved in meeting the person's wishes, and what is the risk if we don't move towards that? What are the lost opportunities? Again, there are different tools that we can use with that. Working, not working, what does success look like, etc. Thinking about success might be thinking about what the person thinks first of all. What do family and community think success would look like? What about the people who work directly with the person, so staff? And what about the organisation? There might be other perspectives as well. So if the person has an engaged psychiatrist or nurse or GP, we might want to bring their perspectives here as well. We also need to think about the learning that we already have and what have we tried and learned already. The 4+1 question is a great way to look at that, or you might do a historical timeline if the issue has arisen over time. So here we think about what have we tried and learned already, where would you find information to tell you what's been attempted before, is there anywhere that people have compiled records of lessons that have been learned, and are there any things getting in the way to moving towards the person and to what the person wants, and are there any blocks within the organisational policies around moving forward to what it is that the person wants to do or achieve. We need to pay attention to consequences if we do nothing. We often pay attention to the hazards and consequences if something's attempted, but we also want to think about the opportunities lost. So what would be missed if we don't support the person to take the risk? One thing to do is to think about ideas. So lots of ideas will be generated around trying to mitigate the risks and help the person have a good life. The Happy Safe Grid is one way to see how those ideas measure up. And what we think about is, are we trying to help the person to be happy so they get what's important to them, and to be safe so they're being supported to manage what's important for them. But sometimes some of the ideas that people have would make the person happy but might not manage the risk, so they might be unsafe and that might conflict with what's important for them. If an idea comes up that would go in this section of the grid, we would think about adding additional strategies to try to minimise the risk. Sometimes ideas are developed that keep the person safe but contradict what's important to them. And again, although sometimes we need to take forward these ideas, what we have to pay attention to is how can we minimise what's making the person unhappy. Once we come up with actions, we need to think about next steps, and what we have to do is demonstrate justifiable decision making. So why would one idea, an option around managing risk and supporting the person to move forward with what it is they want to do, be a better idea than another? So here we think about, what is the option? Is it an option that we'll definitely try? Yes. Is it a maybe? Or is it a definite no? And we would be sharing the reasoning behind that. In 6 months' time, somebody else might come in and say, why didn't you do that at that time? And here is your record of why that was a good idea or not a good idea. And based on that, we would develop a SMART action plan. So who is going to do what and by when around managing the risk and moving the person towards the life that they want. it's really important for all elements of person-centered risk that we're thinking about how the person is involved in decision making. In my life, I don't have complete control over every decision that I make. If I go for a new job, I've decided that I want to do that, but ultimately somebody else is deciding whether I get the job. The last time I moved house, which was only about 6 months ago, I decided I wanted to move house. I'd done the research about what I could afford, but the bank had the final say over whether they would lend me the money to go. So in all of our lives, there are decisions that we take. Sometimes other people are involved, and sometimes other people make the final decision. If we're supporting people to have increased choice and control, we need to clarify which decisions are being made, how the person is involved in that, and who makes the final decision. Sometimes decisions are made that then other people are passed to other people to implement, and if we're going to do that, then it's really important that everybody involved in that are clear about their roles and responsibilities within that. The donut is a great tool to help us think about our core responsibilities, and core responsibilities would be if we didn't do it, we would get in trouble. We also want to be able to support people to use their good judgment and creativity and explore possibilities. So again, being clear about where people can do that without fear of blame is really important. And we also want to think about what's not our responsibility. When we think about person-centered risk, we must always think about contingency as well, the what-if question. If we don't think about that, then sometimes the what-if becomes the biggest blocker and we don't do anything, we don't move forward. So we need to think about what do we need to do to keep the person immediately safe, is there anything else we need to do, and who needs to be informed. But being a person-centered organisation takes more than changing the paper. And I guess that there are several key elements when we think about becoming person-centered. So just changing the paper and just sharing a policy with people doesn't necessarily change the behaviour. We have to think about what does it take to be a person-centred organisation. So we need to have clear leadership with vision, and where people are clear about the vision and the mission of the organisation, they inspire other people within the organisation to deliver that. So if we're clear about that, then our approach to risk will become more aligned to that rather than bump up against it. There should also be a culture of shared values and beliefs so that everybody can talk about and demonstrate person-centred values across the organisation. We need to be focusing on and implementing outcomes for individuals, and everything that we do should be orientated to achieving those. And that can be from simple things like routines where risk might be involved, or ambitions and aspirations where risk might become a factor that we have to pay attention to during it. There should always be a community focus in a person-centred organisation, and often it's community that providers and commissioners feel might get in the way of managing risk or might actually be risky in itself. Crucially, where we're thinking about blame, we're thinking about being less risk averse, and we're thinking about not responding with that eek factor. We have to make sure that we're creating empowered, valued staff who feel trusted and supported. Managers in particular have a role to play here, and if they're working with staff in a person-centred way, ensuring that they've got clear purpose, know what's important to each other and how to support each other, feel appreciated and valued and feel like they're respected, trusted, accountable, and that the shared decision making in place, then we're much more likely for the people who are directly supporting people to be working proactively when it comes to issues of risk. There have to be opportunities for individual and organisational learning. I used to work in an organisation where the chief exec was really clear that we're creating a culture of good tries. So there was an acknowledgement that not everything that we had a go at would work out, but there was also a recognition that we would learn from everything that we did and make sure that we embed that learning in future progress. And we have to be working together. So co-designing what we want to do, co-designing how we're supporting people, co-designing our approaches to risk management as well. And finally, the person-centred practices need to be embedded throughout the organisation so that there needs to be a common language and common practices to deliver all of these elements of around person-centred organisations. So that when we're thinking about person-centred risk, these stages of person-centred approaches really support positive risk-taking. So that's kind of the end of my presentation today, and I just want to check whether you have any questions or comments that would be helpful for me to answer while I'm here now. And please put your questions in the questions box and I'll answer those now. Okay, thank you for that. And that's the end of my presentation. It will be recorded and available to share at a later date. If you want any further information, don't hesitate to get in touch with me at michelle@helensandersonassociates.co.uk. You can find out more information about person-centred risk on our website, which is www.helensandersonassociates.co.uk. Thank you very much. Bye.